Marcus Williams had cleaned floors for 23 years, but he'd never seen his CEO cry until the Tuesday morning in November. The man who commanded billion-dollar acquisitions with the flick of his wrist sat hunched over his mahogany desk, shoulders shaking as he stared at 6 simple lines glowing on his computer screen. Those lines hadn't come from Harvard MBAs or Silicon Valley consultants if they'd come from the night janitor who everyone called Quiet Marcus, the man who emptied trash cans and mopped floors while the corporate world slept. The crisis had been brewing for months at Pinnacle Technologies, one of America's fastest-growing software companies. Their flagship product, a revolutionary AI-powered customer service platform, had a fatal flaw that 30 of the industry's brightest minds couldn't solve. The system would randomly crash during peak usage, costing clients millions and threatening to destroy the company's reputation overnight. CEO Jonathan Blake had assembled what the tech press dubbed the dream team of computer scientists from MIT, former Google engineers, cybersecurity experts who charged $5,000 an hour. For 6 grueling months, they'd worked around the clock, their whiteboards covered in complex algorithms and their conferences rooms reeking of desperation and stale coffee. Each proposed solution failed spectacularly, and with every failure, the laughter grew louder. "Maybe we should ask the janitor," Dr. Sarah Chen had joked during one particularly brutal all-nighter, her voice dripping with exhaustion and sarcasm. The room erupted in bitter laughter. After all, what could a man who'd never set foot in a computer science classroom possibly know about artificial intelligence? Marcus Williams heard everything from the hallway, his mop bucket wheels squeaking softly as he continued his rounds. He'd been listening to these conversations for months, not out of curiosity, but because the conference room doors were thin and voices carried. While the experts debated and argued, Marcus quietly absorbed every technical detail, every frustrated outburst, every desperate theory. What they didn't know was that Marcus Williams wasn't just a janitor. 25 years earlier, he'd been Marcus Williams, PhD candidate in computer science at Carnegie Mellon, writing his dissertation on predictive algorithms. But life had other plans. His wife Sarah had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 32, and their insurance wouldn't cover experimental treatments. Marcus had dropped out 3 months before graduation, taking the first steady job he could find to pay for her care. He'd never looked back, never complained, never mentioned his background. He'd found dignity in honest work and purpose in caring for Sarah, who'd passed peacefully 5 years ago, never remembering that her husband had once been destined for greatness in the very field that now tormented these corporate warriors. The breakthrough came on a cold Tuesday evening in November. Marcus was emptying trash cans in the main conference room when he noticed Jonathan Blake still at his desk at 11 p.m., staring at code printouts scattered across his workspace like fallen leaves. The CEO looked defeated, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from days of stress. "Mr. Blake," Marcus's voice was soft, respectful, "you should go home to your family." Jonathan looked up, startled. He'd never really seen Marcus before, or not really seen him, just another invisible service worker in the background of his important life. "Can't," Jonathan muttered. "We're launching the new version tomorrow, and it's going to fail just like all the others. 30 brilliant minds, and we can't figure out why our AI keeps crashing during peak loads." Marcus set down his trash bag and walked closer, his eyes scanning the printouts. Years of silence broke like a dam. "May I?" he asked quietly, gesturing toward the papers. Jonathan almost laughed, but something in Marcus's calm demeanor stopped him. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the genuine concern in the older man's eyes. He nodded. Marcus studied the code for several minutes, his weathered fingers tracing patterns that the experts had missed. Finally, he sat down at Jonathan's computer and began typing. His fingers moved with surprising speed and precision across the keyboard. "The problem isn't in your algorithms," Marcus said softly as he typed. "It's in your heart." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus continued typing, his voice steady and sure. "Your AI is designed to be efficient, to process requests as fast as possible, but it doesn't understand patience, kindness, or the fact that sometimes the most important thing isn't speed, it's making people feel heard. 6 lines of code appeared on the screen. Not complex algorithms or sophisticated functions, but simple, elegant instructions that prioritized user experience over processing speed, that built in moments of digital empathy, that treated each customer interaction as sacred rather than just another data point to process. Remember, behind every request is a human being / sometimes they just need to feel heard / speed is worthless without compassion / true efficiency includes emotional connection / the best solutions serve hearts, not just systems / kindness is not a bugha, it's the feature '. These aren't just comments, Marcus explained, his voice growing stronger. These are guiding principles for your Eye's decision-making process. Your system crashes because it's trying to process human emotions like mathematical equations. But people aren't problems to be solved, they're souls to be served. Jonathan stared at the screen, then at Marcus. Who are you? Marcus smiled sadly, just a man who learned that sometimes the most advanced technology fails when it forgets the most basic human truths. Your eye needs to pause, to breathe, to remember that efficiency without empathy is just expensive automation. The implementation took 3 days. The 30 experts initially resisted the suggestions from the janitor, their egos bruised by the simplicity of the solution. But as Marcus quietly explained the psychological principles behind his approach, as he demonstrated how artificial intelligence could mirror human emotional intelligence, their laughter died away. Dr. Chen was the first to understand. "You're not just fixing the code," she whispered as she watched Marcus work. "You're teaching it to care." The new system launched the following Monday. For the first time in company history, there were no crashes during peak usage. Customer satisfaction scores soared. The eye didn't just respond faster, it responded better, with digital empathy that made users feel understood rather than processed. The tech press called it revolutionary. Competitors tried desperately to reverse engineer the secret, but they couldn't replicate what Marcus had created because they were looking for complex algorithms when the real innovation was profound simplicity. That Tuesday morning in November, Jonathan Blake called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the main auditorium, buzzing with curiosity. The CEO walked to the podium, but instead of speaking, he gestured toward the back of the room. Marcus Williams stepped forward, wearing his usual janitor's uniform but carrying himself with quiet dignity. The room fell silent. "This is Marcus Williams," Jonathan's voice carried across the auditorium. "For 23 years, he's cleaned our offices, emptied our trash, and listened to our problems. Last week, he solved in 6 lines of code what 30 experts couldn't solve in 6 months." The silence was deafening. "But that's not why he's here," Jonathan continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Marcus taught us something more valuable than any algorithm. He showed us that wisdom doesn't come with degrees or titles. That the person we least expect might have exactly what we need. That kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest force in any system, human or artificial." Jonathan paused, wiping his eyes. "Marcus never told us he had a PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon, never mentioned he'd sacrificed his career to care for his sick wife, never asked for recognition or respect. He just served quietly, with dignity, until the moment we needed him most." The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. 30 experts who had mocked the janitor now stood with tears in their eyes, understanding that they'd witnessed something far greater than technical brilliance. They'd seen what true leadership looked like. Marcus was offered the position of Chief Technology Officer that day. He declined, asking instead to stay in his current role with one addition: mentoring young programmers, teaching them that the best code serves not just systems, but souls. Technology, he told them in his first informal lecture, held in the same conference room where he'd been mocked, is not about showing how smart you are. It's about using what you know to make life better for people who trust you with their problems. The 6 lines of code became legendary in Silicon Valley, not for their technical complexity, but for their profound simplicity. They were framed and hung in Pinnacle's lobby, but their real impact lived in the hearts of everyone who learned that night that genius isn't measured by degrees or titles, but by the willingness to serve others with quiet dignity and uncommon grace. Marcus Williams continued cleaning floors and emptying trash cans, But now he did so as the most respected person in the building. He'd proven that in a world obsessed with artificial intelligence, the most powerful force remains authentic humanity, humble, patient, and endlessly kind. And sometimes, late at night when the building was quiet, Jonathan Blake would find himself in that conference room, staring at those 6 lines on his screen, remembering the moment he learned that true wisdom often comes dressed in janitor's clothes, carrying a mop instead of a diploma, and changing the world one act of quiet service at a time.